What happens when politics seeps into the heart of America's military? Whispers of ideological purges are turning into allegations of targeted threats against serving officers. Emails warning them they'll be removed for supporting Pentagon policies. Generals accused of enforcing loyalty tests instead of rewarding merit. And in the middle of it all, pardons for convicted war criminals, leaving fellow soldiers stunned. This isn't just another debate over policy. It's a battle for the soul of the armed forces, and the outcome could redefine what it means to serve, fight, and lead in America's military.
Thank you. You're a very understanding chairman. I like that. I like that. Ms. Hegseth, you've written, and it's quote, "Oh yeah, and fire any general who hasn't carried water for Obama and Biden's extra constitution and agenda-driven transformation for our military. Clean house and start over." It's come to my attention that current serving military personnel have received emails threatening them with being fired for supporting the current DOD policies. One mail that was sent to a military officer with the subject line, "Clean house," reminiscent of your specific comment, states, and I quote, "With the incoming administration looking to remove disloyal, corrupt, traitorous, liberal officers such as yourself, we will certainly be putting your name into the list of those personnel to be removed. We know you support the woke DEI policies and will ensure you never again influence anyone in the future. You and the redacted spouse's name will be lucky if you're able to collect your military requirement," end quote. Now, I want to remind everyone that these policies that are being referred to date back decades, to the 1940s and 50s, with respect to racial discrimination particularly, and administrations of both parties, including the Trump administration and their first party, caused those policies to be enforced. Mr. Hegseth, are you aware of these emails being sent to officers?
Senator, you mentioned the word accountability, which is something we have not had for the last 4 years.
Are you aware of these messages being sent to officers?
Certainly, I'm not aware of that. It's not one of my efforts, but there's been no accountability for the disaster of the withdrawal in Afghanistan, and that's precisely why we're here today.
Excuse me.
Is that leadership has been unwilling to take accountability. It's the time to restore that to our most senior ranks.
You've written publicly that DI policy is a distraction and have military personnel walking on eggshells. Do you believe that emails like that are essentially threatening both a serving officer and a spouse and claiming that they'll lose their pension will have a distraction and detract from the lethality?
Senator, you mentioned the 40s and 50s, and you're precisely right. The military was a forerunner in courageous racial integration in ways no other institutions were willing to do. I served with men and women of all backgrounds because of the courage of people decades and decades ago. Incredibly important. However, the DEI policies of today are not the same as what happened back then. They're dividing troops inside formations, causing commanders to walk on eggshells, not putting meritocracy first. That's the indictment that's made by those serving right now.
Excuse me.
And why we're having this conversation.
All of your public comments don't talk about meritocracy. They talk about liberal democratic efforts that are destroying the military, that those people are our enemies. That's not meritocracy. That's a political view. And your goal, as I see emerging, is to politicize the military in favor of your particular positions, which you've outlined extensively, which would be the worst blow to the professionalism of the United States military and would undercut readiness, undercut retention, because I can see officers receiving these emails beginning to wonder very seriously if they should continue. Let me change subject for a moment here. You've been instrumental in securing pardons for several convicted war criminals. In at least 2 of these cases, the military personnel who served in combat with these convicted service members were not supportive of the pardons. They did their duty as soldiers to report war crimes. Your definition of lethality seems to embrace those people who do commit war crimes. rather than those who stand up and say, this is not right. So what's the response to your service members who personally witnessed these and courageously reported them to their superiors?
Senator, as someone who's led men in combat directly and had to make very difficult decisions, I've thought very deeply about the balance between legality and lethality, ensuring that the men and women on the front lines have the opportunity to destroy with and close the enemy, and that lawyers aren't the ones getting in the way. I'm not talking about disavowing the laws of war or the Geneva Conventions or the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Sir, I'm talking about restrictive rules of engagement that these men and women behind me understand they've lived with on the battlefield, which has made it more difficult to defeat our enemies. In many of the cases you're talking about in particular, sir, there was evidence withheld, there was prosecutorial misconduct, and as someone who looks case by case and defaults to the warfighter, to the men and women with dust on their boots, not the second guessers in air-conditioned offices in Washington, D.C.
Excuse me.
I look case by case and was proud to work with President Trump to understand those cases and ensure that our warriors are always looked out for.
Those cases were adjudicated by who? People in Washington or fellow non-commissioned officers who had also served, sacrificed, and believed in the ethic of the military? Who were the court-martial?
Senator, in multiple cases, they were actually acquitted, but
some
charges
cases,
lingered.
yes,
regardless of where those competing authorities were, yes, sir.
Some were, but others were convicted, and you asked for pardon. That's the only reason you asked for pardon, because they were convicted. But the other factor, too, is you've already disparaged in writing the Geneva Convention, the rules of law, all of these things. How will you be able to effectively lead a military in which one of the principal elements is discipline, respect for lawful authority? You have made statements to your platoon after being briefed by a JAG officer. Oh, by the way, would you explain what a JAG-off is?
I don't think I need to, sir,
Why not?
because the men and women watching understand.
Well, perhaps some of my colleagues don't understand.
It would be a JAG officer who puts his or her own priorities in front of the warfighters, their promotions, their medals, in front of having the backs of those who are making the tough calls on the front lines.
Thank you, Senator Reid.
Interesting.
Thank you, Senator
Thank you
Reid.
very much.
Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr.
It began with reports that military personnel had received emails warning them their careers could be over simply for aligning with current Department of Defense policies. The language was direct and chilling. One message with the subject line "Clean House" told a serving officer that they would be placed on a removal list, accused of being disloyal and corrupt, and that even their spouse's security was at risk. The note closed with a promise that they would never again influence anyone in the future. If true, this is not just a violation of professional standards, it's a weaponization of fear inside the ranks. While these messages remain unverified, their existence, even as rumors, has deepened anxiety in an already divided institution. The tension revolves around the controversial diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, DI for short. Historically, the military was at the forefront of integration, taking bold steps in the 1940s and 50s to dismantle racial discrimination at a time when much of the country resisted change. Those moves were about unifying the force through merit and shared purpose. But critics today argue that DI has morphed into something very different, a system of political orthodoxy that rewards ideological alignment over competence. Commanders are described as walking on eggshells, fearful that disagreement with the agenda will label them as disloyal. This shift is more than a workplace culture debate. According to those speaking out, it's creating fault lines between leaders and the men and women they command. In a profession where trust in leadership is critical, these accusations cut deep. Warriors are questioning whether those at the top are still prioritizing combat readiness, or if they're simply enforcing a social vision from above. Sensitivity seminars, critics say, are taking precedence over survival skills, and the operational edge that once defined the U.S. military is being dulled in favor of political conformity. The crisis of trust escalated when attention turned to another controversial issue: pardons for convicted war criminals. Several service members convicted of battlefield crimes, including those who had been opposed by their own fellow soldiers, received presidential pardons. These weren't minor infractions. They were cases where military personnel had risked their careers and reputations to report wrongdoing, following the code of honor that demands accountability in the field. For those whistleblowers, the pardons felt like a betrayal, undermining the principle that discipline and integrity must be upheld even in the fog of war. Supporters of the pardons argue a different case. They say some convictions were the result of flawed investigations, withheld evidence, or overly restrictive rules of engagement that made decisive action impossible. From this perspective, the pardons were about protecting warfighters from the second-guessing of lawyers in comfortable offices far from the battlefield. They believe that when legality and lethality collide, the balance should tilt toward giving troops every possible advantage to defeat the enemy. This debate over legality versus lethality strikes at the core of military identity. On one side, the argument is clear: laws of war and the Geneva Conventions exist to protect civilians, maintain moral authority, and prevent abuses that damage America's standing. On the other side, there's the belief that overly cautious rules can cost lives and missions. When this clash plays out in public, it's not just an abstract legal issue, it's a real test of the military's values and priorities. For whistleblowers, the stakes are even higher. In today's climate, reporting a war crime can mean career suicide. Even when they come forward with evidence, they risk being sidelined, branded as troublemakers, or forced out. There are accusations of cases being mishandled, evidence disappearing, and prosecutorial misconduct sweeping uncomfortable truths under the rug. This isn't just bureaucratic incompetence, it feels to many like a calculated betrayal of those who took an oath to protect both the nation and the principles it stands for. All of this points to a bigger question: what kind of force do we want the U.S. military to be? Are we still committed to the idea of a merit-based, politically neutral institution that serves the Constitution above all else? Or are we watching it morph into a machine shaped by partisan agendas, where advancement depends on towing an ideological line and loyalty to a political cause outweighs battlefield skill? The alleged threat emails, whether verified or not, are a symbol of this uncertainty. They tap into the fear that the military is no longer a place where performance and professionalism guarantee security and respect. Instead, it's becoming an environment where one's personal beliefs, political leanings, or even public statements can determine career survival. The DI debate, in turn, has been weaponized by both sides. Supporters frame it as necessary progress to build a military that reflects the diversity of the country it serves. Opponents see it as a distraction from the military's core mission, a tool for political indoctrination, and a dangerous shift away from meritocracy. Caught in the middle are service members who simply want to do their jobs, train for the realities of combat, and trust that their leadership has their backs without political strings attached. Then there's the lingering wound of the war crime pardons. These decisions have left divisions in their wake, with some troops feeling vindicated and others feeling abandoned by the system. The underlying message, depending on perspective, is either that the military will go to bat for its warfighters, or that it will excuse serious breaches of conduct if it serves a political narrative. Both interpretations carry consequences for morale, discipline, and the perception of fairness inside the ranks. When you put it all together, you have an institution at a crossroads. The trust between the top brass and the boots on the ground is eroding. The standards that once defined military professionalism are under strain, and the conversation has shifted from purely military readiness to culture wars being fought inside the barracks and briefing rooms. If this continues unchecked, the consequences could be severe. In a profession where unity, discipline, and trust are as critical as weapons and tactics, the injection of partisan politics threatens to undermine everything. Decisions made in Washington are shaping the daily realities of those on deployment, those training for missions, and those recovering from the mental and physical scars of service. The choice facing military leadership, and by extension the nation, is stark. Do we double down on ideological enforcement, risking readiness and morale in the name of political alignment? Or do we return to the principles of merit, discipline, and unity that have carried the armed forces through every challenge in its history? Right now, the signs are not encouraging. The public interrogations, the heated debates over policy, and the stories coming from inside the ranks paint a picture of a force in the middle of an identity crisis. The next steps taken by those in power will determine whether the military emerges stronger and more united, or further fractured and politicized. And in the end, it won't be the politicians or the top generals who pay the immediate price. It will be the men and women in uniform, standing on the front lines, relying on the chain of command to have their backs. If that chain is weakened by mistrust, politicization, or compromised discipline, the risks extend far beyond the battlefield. The question now is simple but urgent: can we fix the cracks before they break the foundation entirely? Or are we already too far down the path of turning the military into another arena for America's endless culture wars? What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this discussion eye-opening, hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories shaping our world. The next one is even more controversial, and you won't want to miss it.